that should now be recording. I'm just waiting to see. Sorry about this. My screen is not responding as it has done all the way through the rest of the conference.
See how I am?
No, we are okay. So that's fine. So welcome to Laurie. Thank you very much for being with us today. I remember hearing Laurie speak about white privilege at Miami APT conference 4 or 5 years ago, I think. And that made a big impression with me. So I know she's going to be a great presenter. We've rather constrained her into an hour, but she's promised she's going to try and get through the slides in an hour, but she is able to stay on a little bit longer afterwards if you're able to stay and to pick up some issues that you would like to. So Laurie, thank you so much for making the time and for being with us. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jerry, who has been holding my hand for a month while I've been getting this ready. And he's absolutely right that the 1 hour is my challenge. Hell of an assignment for an ENFP. However, I do have a full design, as I was saying, and it goes for 60 minutes, but an ENFP never knows what she's going to say, never says the same thing twice. So that's part of the challenge. But I am so pleased to be here at a BAPT conference. I love presenting at BAPT, helping my neighbors in the world of type, And I love being at BAPT. I usually like being there in person. I love coming, and then I can visit with my friends. But in this way, at least we're together. And I like being with you because you're also smart. And you're usually so appreciative too. But it's a very smart group. So like Jerry said, we'll get through the slides, we'll have our hour, but if there's more conversation and you want to spend some of your 15 minutes of your half an hour break time with me, that would be fine. But I was going to say something about my title. So you've jumped ahead.
Sorry, no, I had to do that to let people in. I'm sorry, because my screen's not responding in the right way, but we're here. That's fine.
You have to, oh, I'm not going to try and figure that out. Okay. So I'm here to bring you the connection between emotional intelligence and MBTI preferences, not knowing at this point how many of you are already using emotional intelligence, but because they are so good together. And I'm wanting you to be able to think about that as we're going through this, even as we go through MBTI, think with an emotionally intelligent brain, asking for some connections. And the message being that personality type, our preferences is not destiny, meaning that we can, as we already know, develop. And it doesn't mean that certain types have definitely going to be higher on their emotional intelligence and other types. There is a correlation, and that's what we're going to explore. Thank you, Jerry. Slide. So this is what we're going to do. Well, of course, we have to examine the basics about MBTI and EQ and explore the obvious connections between the two using step 1. In which case I will be doing what Linda Behrens is not very fond of. We'll be talking about a letter at a time or 2 letters at a time. She doesn't like that, she said yesterday. And we're going to expand by looking at step 2 of the MBTI and then conjecture on the possible impacts for our clients and for our clients. I think it was going to say for ourselves and for our clients, but that's fine. So in the next slide, I want to know a little bit about you, about the 19 people that we have here. So in the one before that, Jerry. So I want to know, you have your type preferences there because you've been doing that. And I also would like to know, if you can put it in the chat box, how comfortable you are with type, new to type, or advanced practitioner. And you might as well also, put in familiar with EQ or not familiar with EQ. How about some comments there so I'll know who's in the box? And as you're looking at everybody's types, maybe somebody can help me see what the patterns are. That's what the type table is for. I'm looking at individuals, but it's a lot to figure out. Do we have more there? Let's see, you're writing. Advanced, yes, we know that. And an EQ practitioner. Okay. Jane, so any comments that you have and any explanations as questions come up, I'd love to have your assistance on that. Comfortable, little usage, basic understanding, less with EQ. Okay. It's such a natural, wait till it's just so perfect. It's a wonderful thing to add to your toolbox. And certified EQI, Shauna. Okay. Shauna, could you say which instrument you're using? EQI, is that with, what's his name?
Yeah, it's the EQI EQ360.
Yep, great.
Yeah.
Great. All right, so we're running the gamut. We will quickly do our reviews, but we have folks that are new to this and folks that are proficient. Fine, I got it. So here's what we're going to do. Next slide. We're going to dispel some myths about type, but they're probably not myths for you. I want you, as I was saying before, to listen to them with the intention of discerning how the use of MBTI brings value to yourself and your clients when you include EQ. If you ask questions I will try and cruise the chat box, and Jerry said he will also do that. And because if another one of you has the answer to someone's question in the chat box, feel free to put it in there. But why I want us to be looking at this is because type and EQ go together like PB&J, like peanut butter and jelly, like tea and crumpets, like fish and chips. They enhance and they in the most marvelous way. And each one contributes to better intrapersonal understanding and more effective interpersonal. So I see that that's really what would enhance all of us in our practice. The myths about type, as I said, which probably are not myths for you. Let's go on to click the button, Jerry. That while preferences are qualitative, not quantitative variables, and sometimes it's not the same as behavior. We know this, that it's hardwired from the twinkle to the wrinkle. We don't change our types. Here I am, really past middle age, thinking I was going to stop self-actualizing. And I just learned that I'm in another whole stage of my life from my ENFP self-actualization self. Hardwired, also neuroscience research is available now. There's a wonderful article, How to Use Your Brain. And of course, we have Dario. That it's dichotomous, they're psychological opposites, and it's about development. That whole fact there, that we can, that we have been thinking about those opposites. And now if you watch Dario's presentation, we see that we cross lines even in the opposites. We all have preferences developed on one side better than the other, but it's about development. And then we have step 2. Oh, I also put this in there. As that probability index, has that arrived? I think when I first did these slides, it was brand new. The new MBTI global assessment. Is that being used in the UK?
I'm not sure it's launched in the UK yet. It was launched in the US when I was still with the Myers-Briggs company, which I'm not anymore, but it wasn't released in Europe yet.
Okay.
Could be a year out of date by now.
Yes, that organization continues to tink and tweak things. And then 5 is the new, not so new anymore, but adding the step 2, which is actually what I think is the preferred instrument to be using with the EQ because of the behavioral subscales. It's almost uncanny how they call upon the same words that are included in emotional intelligence. And also, I'd really like to see us engage in some research. Was the one on Dario's presentation that asked about had he looked at step 2 correlations. He mentioned it. And don't we love Dario Nardi? I love saying his name, Dario Nardi. And the other day he had this bandana on his head. He looked so jaunty. And he's been really validating even more that it's up there in our brains. Okay. Next one. But the emphasis in all applications of the MBTI, this is where we see how good it is for EQ. To understand differences between people. There was one of the talks was about transformation. How have we transformed? I guess Linda asked that. Well, we're understanding differences between people better. It's also ourselves. And EQ is about knowing yourself. Potential growth edges. That's important. That's the development aspect. Understanding and appreciating how and why others may differ from you. And it says right in looking at types of fundamentals, which was the go-to book I always did when I was interpreting. Knowing that these differences are all valuable, contribute to communication and relationships. Okay. The next one. So personality type is determining our social mechanisms for interacting and managing ourselves and being with others, because it informs us about communication, decision-making, problem-solving, leadership style. By the way, leadership style has been shown with the EQ that higher EQ leads to more effective leadership style than higher IQ. And we'll look especially about empathy on that. And of course, about our stresses when we're not being our best selves, right? Next one. Just a quick review. Then, what does EQ teach us about? There, sometimes you'll see it as EQ, sometimes you'll see it as EI, emotional intelligence. I like EQ because it's like IQ, and sometimes I use CQ, cultural intelligence. It's our effectiveness in these competencies. And they usually use a 2x2 table: self-awareness and self-management, other awareness, social awareness, and relationship management. So handling your own emotions and navigating those of others, which are our intra and interpersonal skills. So you're already using EQ, some of you with the 360, maybe not all with the 360. So let me explain that. Let's see what the next slide says first. Jerry. We'll go just a little further here. So it's emotional intelligence are a set of emotional and social skills that influence, perceive, and express ourselves. So is MBTI. Develop and maintain social relationships. And here they're measuring them more. We don't do that in the MBTI, and especially a 360. How we cope with challenges, our social skills, and how we're using emotional information effectively. So here, if you take an EQ 360, like any 360, you're answering a set of questions for yourself, a lot of questions, and then you're getting up to a dozen people answering those same questions about you. So how I perceive myself and how others perceive me is the richness of that. Have you ever heard the definition of personality that says personality is the voice through which I am speaks? The voice through which who I am speaks. Now, I think that's a little lofty. The I am of the ego is certainly there, but we are much greater than our ego. But in that I am are also all of these factors of emotional intelligence. So when you do a 360, everyone answers questions about you, and they will include your boss if you have one, your subordinates if you have one, your coworkers, your friends, your family, and everybody's take on how they see you doing what you have already said you're doing yourself. And then you get to see it charted. So, and you get quite a wonderful report back. This one happens to be the ESCI, Emotional Social Competence Inventory by the Hay Group. I'll mention more about that at the end. And I strongly recommend that whether you're going to become a practitioner or not, that you do the EQ for yourself, just to add to your growing understanding of who we are as complex humans. Is Laurie's audio going in and out, fading at times? Is it creating such that you can't hear me?
It's okay for
I am
me.
sorry. I asked. You're okay?
It's certainly okay for me. I'm having difficulty with managing the slides slightly because I can't let latecomers in, but that's another issue.
I think the comment is interesting. Jane's always giving us an educational reference, always giving us a school reference. She's been so consistent. They're surprised that EQ includes relationship management. Oh my God, because we are a creature, we are relational creatures. That's so interesting. Relationship management is part of emotional intelligence, and empathy is the most important thing for those relationships. Jerry, can we go to the next slide? So Daniel Goldman was the guy that pulled this all together, and his books are good. He didn't invent this. What Goldman did is he did a lot of research and pulled this all together from a variety of sources. He identified it as the ability to understand our own emotions, their effects on our performance, what we're feeling and why, how your feelings help or hurt what you're trying to do, because feelings aren't all blessed and doing everything, contributing to the best behavior, to sense how others see you and then to get data about it, align your self-image with a lot. So when you work with people and are giving them feedback on their 360, and you're showing them what they thought about themselves and then how they were rated by people that they asked to fill this out on them, then we're aligning ourselves with that reality. That's very important. So an accurate sense of your strengths and challenges, that's really a part of this. There's good news coming. The next one, Jerry. Empathy now. I think this is the biggest. The intent of empathy is tuning into the other person, wanting to understand. In many of my workshops, we use listen for understanding. So often we're listening, but not listening to understand. We're listening to respond or listening to critique, wanting to understand and privileging that, making that important, listening attentively to do that, sensing others' emotions and how they see things. That's a strength. Taking an active interest in concerns, using information to inform future interactions, walking in others' shoes if I choose to. And I read just in one of my diversity things I was reading, she said, I have to take my shoes off in order to walk in someone else's shoes. I never thought about that because that's an old quote, right? You have to walk a mile. It was moccasins because we borrow from other cultures without asking them. But you have to take your own shoes off first. So you have to know what you're wearing and how to take them off. And you have to have a repertoire. I used to say that that empowerment comes from having the knowledge of what you're doing, the understanding of it, but having a repertoire, alternative behavioral responses. If our response is always this, then that won't give us any place to go, but we're developing alternative responses for different situations. And we're talking about intrapersonal emotional intelligence and interpersonal emotional intelligence. And it was empathy that the research is showing as the key leadership quality, showing the most effective leaders. Next slide. The good news. Emotional intelligence is learned. You don't just get born emotionally intelligent or not. We can improve emotional intelligence at any point in our lives. That's wonderful. And Jung said that one's least preferred personality type preferences can and should be developed. So that's a part of our value system, right? Development, type development is using the other side when necessary. Okay. And the additional bonus, oh yeah, Laurie's diversity message. Awareness and consciousness can contribute to anti-racist behaviors and support being a white ally. You know that diversity and white privilege has been kind of my life work for the last 15, 20, maybe it's even 30 years by now, certainly before it became popular. And so the fact that we can use this, to be anti-racist in our behaviors in the world and be more understanding of other cultures. And even Jerry and I had this talk before you all came in about BAPT looking at its own composition, its demographics of wanting to diversify, as most organizations will say they want to diversify. And how do you do that? Well, first you have to look at your own privilege. You have to interrogate whiteness before a majority white group can be a safe place for others to join. And the UK especially, given its population, it would be wonderful to see MBTI reaching that population and joining you as part of the community in the diverse population in the UK. All right, what do we have next? I don't know till I see it. All right, so this again is familiar to everybody, but look at it now in terms. Oh, somebody said they could hear better when they turned their camera off. That's right, Mark. I've heard that in other places. If that's the problem you're having, you can turn your camera off. And you know, when I'm on Zoom, I don't like to look at myself. They've said that for Zoom fatigue, it's not just not liking it, it's not natural for yourself when you're doing a group. You are behind those eyeballs. So you will have less Zoom fatigue. Shauna's nodding her head. So nice to see you. You will have less fatigue if you tap that thing that says to make your own little picture invisible, whatever it says. I forget the words exactly. It's not just putting your picture up. Hi, Angelina. So here, think about this, and maybe you could chat it in. I can't unmute you all because it'll get chaotic. But think about the letters in terms of what I've described as emotional intelligence so far that you are retaining, and some of you are more knowledgeable about it, and what that letter might contribute, not just. So for example, let's start clicking, Greg, to animate this. So we have our two attitudes. Do the next click. We have EI and JP, psychic energy flow. So for extroversion, putting that energy out in the world, does that give us an emotional intelligence? Is there something that extroverts might have or do that might make them show up more as more emotionally intelligent? Sometimes it seems unfair that certain folks just do things more easily. So for example, if you're talking about interpersonal and how well we relate to others, extroversion's up there to relate to others, giving energy out into the world and getting energy back from it, right? For those with introverted preferences, there are positive implications. Even in the description of introversion, it talks about intrapersonal attributes of self-awareness, self-regulation, emotional self-control, achievement, and resilience. That's for introversion. In extroversion, in the descriptions in our books, it says demonstrates empathy, ability to lead. Look at that. And if we go to JP, well, for that one, I think it may affect our orientation to change. Those of us welcoming change, those of us not, distance. Plus, it's going to indicate which of our mental functions we're using in the outer world. And then when we get to the mental functions, that's really the part that emotional intelligence is going to be having the bearing on, because those are our mental functions. Jerry, SN and TF. So we have in our sensing intuition, the theory. It's where the captain of our personality resides in one of those four. It'll have everything to do with our motivation and following through. And of all those letters, which are the two that just jump out, that cry emotional intelligence or perception of emotional intelligence? Which two? You're listening and you're not chatting anymore. Yes. T and F. S and F is an interesting. I'm glad I asked you. I was thinking initially of thinking feeling because we get critiquing and we get appreciation. The thing around sensing we'll get to in a little while has to do with the concreteness and extroverted feeling, putting that feeling out in the world. While we jump to TF, overuse of an EQ facet is as dangerous as underuse. Overuse. Well, I think that's a whole conversation I'd like to have with Jane Kesey, which I can't have right now, but I appreciate that it's in there. Overuse as underuse. Extroverted feeling. And not putting yourself in the equation sometimes. I remember that about extroverted feeling types taking care of everybody else. But combining the letters is essential, even though we're looking at them, because they don't operate individually. But I'm going to suggest that we get more value out of using step 2. But before we do, let's just look at some combinations of the letters that can derail us. So introverted sensing. Actually, I'm going to start with extroverted thinking and extroverted feeling down at the bottom of the list because someone mentioned that. Extroverted feeling can ignore boundaries, for example. So it's not automatically all love and kisses. Extroverted thinking, assuming a better analysis, will enrich relationships and often that critiquing function. And now at the top, introverted sensing has a tendency to equate facts. So these are generalizations, of course, and stereotypes, you'll forgive me. Introverted intuition, where we can make things up, wonderful intuition, misaligning meaning to events, misaligning meaning. Extroverted sensing can fail to see the trend or patterns in behavior. And you might also think as two people are engaging and interacting in relationships, we used to give lots of examples like that doing workshops, and where we miss the boat with each other because we're in different places. That's not relationship enhancing. Extroverted intuition, where I live, overwhelming people with too much information. Same thing twice. Overwhelming ourselves sometimes. I think my last workshop in person for BAPT, wasn't that the one where I did how our dominant can be a, how did I say that? A tyrant for ourselves. What did I say about introverted sensing? Sensing can equate a fact with emotions, being more concrete there without getting the emotional information. Introverted feeling can misread and misjudge other people's experiences and maybe not remember to ask. And finally, introvert, certainly ignoring one's own feelings, unless they're really in the jackpot, then they really go deep there, in favor of the logical analysis. I was blessed with an INTP son, and I think I'm continually attracted to INT people, and it is a lifelong learning experience. Can miss out on its opposite function strength. Absolutely, absolutely. Appreciation of difference, right? Appreciation of, and out on our own opposite function strength. I think age helps that. Remember Jung saying something that in the second half of life, the other side of us is trying some time with us, is trying to express itself. I definitely have seen that in my life. The second half of life, the other letters are wanting time from me and are forcing that. Let's move on. How are we doing time-wise? Well, you know, we're whipping right through it. Let's go to step 2, because here I think it's even better. As much look at just the MBTI letters, it's even better to look at step 2. Claire Heyman made a correction in the chat. You can read that. So the step 2, for those of you who aren't using it, is magical. Once I discovered step 2, that's really all I wanted to use in my coaching, and it's definitely the EQ world. It's the expanded version. It's 5 subscales or facets under each of the 4 dichotomy. So it breaks down the difference within type in pretty marvelous way. Now, we are understanding more differences within type even without MBTI. And Dario's presentation, where he looked at, what was it, logical, holistic on one side, and it was like right brain, left brain, within the same MBTI 4 letters. So he's finding that even in the 4 letters. That's why I asked him the question about step 2. It's useful to discern more specific behaviors related to any of the preferences, and it is behavioral. It's not like step 1. It is behavioral. It's a snapshot in time. And explains nuance, because it will change. It's not like you're born that way and you stay that way. Different stages in your life, different facets may be showing up or emphasized. So it's explaining a nuance of difference between those of the same 4-letter type preferences, and as such can make new connections to EQ. So let's look at the next one. I was going to read some of these examples in here. Here are the facets for extroversion and introversion. Think about what I said about emotional intelligence as we look at these words. Do you initiate or do you receive? Are you waiting to be invited, or are you inviting other people? Do you express what it is you're feeling and thinking so people can see you doing that? Or are you contained and they don't? Because there's items in here that says readily shows feelings, works well by being supportive, actively encourages cooperation, soliciting others' input. These are item frequency reports in the relationship management cluster of the 360. So are you gregarious or are you intimate? Active, reflective, wonderful modifiers of EI. Some of the depth of E and I, and not the whole domain even. There's so much more, but the richness of that, looking at that and how someone will show up and be evaluated as emotionally intelligent or less emotionally intelligent or more, or wanting more from them. So Jane contributes also to the descriptions, uses words that were generated by people themselves who have those facets. Yeah, I was thinking about Jean as I went through this, that Jean wasn't here. Jean Kumaro wrote them down, asked rather than guessing. And she went through a lot of different words. I was around long enough when they were developing this, and they changed the words a few times, making me annoyed after I'd already figured that I'd understood it. And the definitions of these words are important too. If we move to the step 2 facets, we have concrete versus abstract, realistic, imaginative, practical, conceptual, experiential, theoretical, traditional, original. With how willing we will be to try and change this. What I forgot to mention also is that people will crisscross here, so that you could come out as a, let's go back to the one before it, Jerry, because It's easier to see, I think, in the EI. Jerry, can we go back one?
I think we have on my screen.
Oh, I see. Okay, here we are. So as an extrovert, I am a intimate extrovert these days. I am more satisfied with one-to-one than I am with group, except when I'm presenting. Then I prefer presenting to you in person and being there and not having you in a little box, because I do not get energy back from Zoom. I get it from human beings. But when I take the step 2 facets, I would come out that way. We have gregarious introverts. We have introverts who surprise people because they are chatting up with a lot of folks. It's for the folks that surprise you. Well, I thought you were, and we put a letter. And then we're doing a stereotype in our head, right? An expressive introvert, a reflective extrovert. So think about how that's what the benefit of step 2 is. You find out where you cross the line or where you're in the middle, which is also a very interesting category. I like the mid zone because it kind of says you have access to both sides. All right, thank you. And then back to the next one, the sensing and intuition. Maybe you are a practical intuitive. I feel like I am, as was, I can't call up his name now, that theorist. The name is escaping me. A practical. Yes, I'm intuitive, but I'm not that abstract, and I am more imaginative, and I am definitely practical. Practical theory. Kurt Lewin was his name, and he wanted a practical theory. The next one. The step 2 report applies your identified facets to give specific feedback suggestions on communication, decision-making, managing, conflict and management change. So that's why you get a very big report, 23, 24 pages, right? Clients love it. There's so many pages there, and you can't possibly go through it in just an hour. I have an hour and a half for a feedback session with step 2. But after you get your profile, and we'll do the other 2 letters too, after you get your profile, it lets you know, given the way you crisscross in your profile and all those facets, here's what you tend to do in communication. Here's what you should do to enhance your communication style. Here's how you could make it better. Here's what you're missing in decision making. Here's what you are doing in conflict that may not be working. So all of that is, it's like a prescription for a coaching session. It is so perfect. It's right there. And when you apply the EQ along with this, the richness of that combination is just amazing. So my experience with EQ and step 2 is from my work with the Center for Emotional Intelligence and Human Relations, which is on the East Coast, primarily for clergy, but faith-based organizations, but don't let that keep you away, because it's wonderful, wonderful work where you can go do EQ. And we were doing week-long events in which the members, the participants came with their 360, and they were learning human relation skills, and they were in T group basically for 5 days. And in the middle of it, they would have a one-to-one session with one of us trainers looking at their feedback and then watching how they behaved in the group. I started bringing MBTI Step 2 with me. I didn't bring it with me. I asked them in advance to take the Step 2, and I brought their results with me. So they would then get a session looking at their Step 2 results and their ESKI EQ feedback. It was amazing. It was so much better than doing it without, because they were looking at their preferences. They were looking at what they and how they understood themselves in the world. So that's what I wanted to put out there. I wish Zoom chat had a like button. Doesn't it in the reactions? Yeah, it has, well, it has thumbs up and hearts. You can go to reactions. Step 2, here we go. Think emotional intelligence. On the thinking side, now let's look at the contrast. We're logical, or we're empathetic, or we're somewhere in the middle. empathy is right there on the feeling side, number one. Plus, in the step 2 model, the first facet, those two there, is the most predictive of the whole letter preference. The most, whether you're logical or empathetic. Feeling types show up as more emotionally intelligent. So all the feeling types are getting higher scores. Reasonable versus compassionate. Questioning critical versus accommodating. And do you see what I'm seeing? How they just kind of, it's not fair, huh? But it doesn't mean that people can't realize about this and see what they're using in their left brain or their right brain and practice behaviors to get the impact that they want. So much of this comes up in relationship. And then the tough versus tender. Think about being a boss, think about being a manager, sometimes think about being a parent. You know, how are we delivering our behavior in terms of our preferences and our emotional intelligence? Next one. The judging versus perceiving. This can have a big bearing on your participants' coaching plans if you are a coach. Are some of you coaches? You could put your little arrow, you could put a little thumbs up in your reaction box. And I know who's a coach. Of course, it's getting harder to see all this and see all you and the gallery. All right, some of the things I was going to say. Sensing and intuition, one thing I think sensing brings that is a plus for emotional intelligence is the body-based experience. Body, not up here, body. My whole life I'm working on getting more of it in my body. And then think side correlates to EQ, correlates. Wouldn't this be a great little research study for that? Perceiving and judging have a bearing, as I said, on your coaching relationship. And coaching is such a wonderful modality today, especially for our practitioners. So systematic versus casual. It's the most predictive one. That's an interesting one. Planful or open-ended. Early starting, pressure prompted, scheduled or spontaneous, methodical or emergent. So how we proceed, how we do the do in the world, how we come across to others in that way, how we follow through, how people find us trustworthy or not trustworthy. I'm sure you could find emotional intelligent questions in there that will relate to this. So we're doing very well time-wise. I am going to pause here. We have till 10:30, right? I'm looking at 10, and pause here for questions or comments. And in this time, I would actually like you to be unmuted. So unmute yourself if you have something that you'd like to say. Or a question you'd like to ask.
Hi, Laurie, it's me.
Hi, Angelina.
Sorry, I wasn't. I was listening to the beginning. I wasn't on camera, or I thought I wasn't, and then my naughty child put the camera on. But I've been child herding anyway. What I'm interested in is when you work with those groups, did you say you use the step 2 and the emotional intelligence together?
Yeah.
The 2 questionnaires together.
Well, they have to do this ahead of time. The hardest thing is the herding of cats. Did they fill out their ESCI? Did they get 12 people? Did they fill out theirs? Did they send them in? Because it's all computer scored. It's computer stored big to get them into this form. Just like, whereas step 2, you're just doing it yourselves. But they took that instrument in advance and the results had come. I gave them their step 2 results before they came to the event in another city, because there's so many pages to read.
This was my question, was how did they cope with the fact that there's so many scales in this and scales in the other one? So they had it in advance.
They had the step 2 in advance, but the ESCI, they didn't get till they got there. because we had to present on brain stuff, and emotional intelligence has some very technical slides. So we were teaching them about emotional intelligence before they got their results. Once they got into the one-to-one session with their trainer slash coach, it was like they were so excited looking at this data. And some of it was discouraging for some of them, especially with type preferences that found it harder to show this, or where their image of themselves was so different that they were evaluated by their colleagues, or, you know, thank God they were friends and family. And but you need to know how you're being seen, really.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I
that,
like the
Angelina.
360 version.
I mentioned fish and chips in the beginning when I said how EQ and MBTI go together. And I remember the wonderful fish and chips from a truck going to Angelina's house when I was in England, when we were visiting. I think Danielle was with us too. And we said, we weren't at the house yet. She said, I think the fish and chips truck should be on. And she looked up where it would even be in the neighborhood. I was totally blown away that a fish and chips truck would be driving around this neighborhood in this little town.
Only on Wednesday.
Thank you. Anybody else? Here Jane says how type patterns can lessen the sting of EQ feedback, yet still allow it to be taken seriously. Jane, that could use some expansion. Would you be willing to unmute and say some words about that?
I'm thinking even, just for example, a thinking leader who's being told they're rather cold and maybe not empathetic. When they think about it in terms of being an INTJ, they can see how they can be misperceived in their objective, waiting to see what everyone is saying about something, and yet they realize they've got to show more warmth, that they're being misread, and that the trust isn't there because people can't read them. So that's just one example. Instead of going, well, what do they expect? I'm not going to be, I'm not going to fake my emotions. Might be if I only use type or only use DQ. You put the two together, and they can make sense of what they're being told in a much deeper way.
Wonderful example. Plus, in that particular example, I think it helps when they learn the skill of being able to articulate to a group how they know they are now being perceived, and they're able to. You all think that I haven't got any feeling about that because I haven't said anything yet, but it is my tendency to wait till all of you have spoken. When we we peep our own hole card, used to be an expression. When we self-reveal, it is so endearing to a group who have seen us a certain way, but didn't we know we could see ourselves. When we explain, teach them to do that, talking in process. I'm not disagreeing, I'm just waiting until you have finished or whatever. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to, on the back of what Jane just said and you just said, I think it's really interesting, particularly when there's a 360 aspect, even if it's not an EQ 360, any 360, to put it alongside type, so people know what's seen and what's not seen in terms of the dynamic.
We have children somewhere. Yeah, what's seen and not seen. Great, great. It just adds another very important understanding dimension. I was going to read the two that came from emotional self-awareness and the self-awareness culture. Able to describe how own feelings affect own actions. Describes underlying reasons for our own feelings. Do we share that, or do we keep it to ourselves? And if we share it, what difference would it make? Think about in an intimate personal relationships. It makes all the difference in the world. Aware of the connection between what is happening and own feelings. Well, that's just another self-awareness there. Shows awareness of own feelings. Shows awareness of, well, we might think that you do, and then people evaluating saying they don't get it. So that's such important information. Okay, very good. Let's go on then. Thank you for that. And let's go on to the next slide, which is going almost to the end, dreaming forward. And I'd like your comments on this. So as I dream forward, I would love to see proficiency with emotional intelligence for all MBTI users and vice versa. The EQ community were not all MBTI proficient. They were not all MBTI qualified or certified. They were not all, if they knew it, using step 2. You know, those who have already kind of flown the coop. They did it years ago, but they've forgotten, or they didn't like it, or they've moved on to something else, right? Because that's out there too. But seeing the power of the two together. And the next one, use of EQ and MBTI Step 2, coaching participants on both their results and their profiles. We've just spoken a little bit about that. Including that in training. You know, I've brought MBTI to coach training in different ways, just as I've brought unread white privilege to coaches, because I think those of us working with people, if we are white, need to have an understanding of that. So maybe even in the certification of one's professional membership, there could be the inclusion of these. Trainers qualified to use Step Q360. Could BAPT ever provide training opportunities this way? I'm less familiar with your charter and what BAPT sees as its role, whether that might be possible, whether a group could form that wanted to work virtually to work through the EQ 360 and learn it for themselves. Any comments on what's up there?
I think sometimes we can negotiate discounts for BAPT members and things, can't we, with the training providers? So it might be something
Discount?
to.
Oh, you mean money?
Yeah.
You mean money?
If someone wanted to train in EQ, quite often you can partner with the EQ company and say offer something to the members. So it'd be interesting to find out what people would think was useful.
Bye.
That would be fabulous. If you had a captive group, if you had your own 10 to 12 people, and trainers to that group, and that would be a one, you know, without other people joining it, a 10 to 12 would carry it. The resource that Jerry put up is the last one there. Is the Center for Emotional Intelligence and Human Relations, of whom I am a part, a member, although I recently stopped being on the committee. Have you ever gotten to the point where you just didn't want to do administration anymore? That's the new phase in my life that I am not, I just wasn't feeling the love. And I said, no, but I will continue to train and I will, hey there. I remember this kid.
Getting a
That's
good
Angelina.
demonstration of extroverted sensing going on next to me here. I'm sorry.
Has been from the very beginning, as I recall, that child. So you can go to that site, eqhr.org, has a brand new logo and everything. And as I say, please don't be deterred by the fact that it says faith-based. Remember, I'm a Jewess, and these are all clergy, Protestant clergy for the most part, Catholic, a rabbi in the group, but somehow I'm with them. And it's a really good fit for nonprofit orgs as well. I'm trying to help them to say it could be faith and nonprofit, but they have connections with a lot of judicatories. And there is a connection in the UK that I've already heard about through some church, but I should bring that to one of you there that may, but you can see all the offerings. And of course, they're all virtual now. So we can do anything, anywhere. And I think our minimum is 8 for a group. So let me now read what Carly said here. I'm curious what you've all noticed about certain 4-letter types when it comes to ability to read what is going on with others emotionally and understanding where they're coming from versus acting on that info.
I can expand on that if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a type practitioner. My mom is a type practitioner. She's a INFJ, just as one example. And she and I have conversations about people our whole, constantly. That's what we do all the time. And she struggles. She struggles to know what's going on with other people. What is the reason? What's driving their behavior? And we've had a lot of INFJs, INFPs say that to us. They're like, I'm really empathetic and really good at adapting, but not so great at necessarily knowing what's going on with the other person. And so there's two different parts of emotional intelligence. And I was just curious what patterns you've all noticed. Even my sister-in-law, who's an ESFP, doesn't always know what's going on with others. I wouldn't say she's exceptional at that, right? But she's really, really cautious with others, and certainly would be much less likely than myself to step on toes, etc.
Self and others. I think culture is going to have an effect in here. I would throw that in. And I'm amused by your ESTJ, INFJ combination. That's my INTP son and his ENFP mom. But yes, that's where the learning comes, right? So does anyone want to respond to Carly? One being clued in, the other being responsive.
And sometimes part of it's being a 1% of the population, right? You don't see things the same way as others. Maybe I don't know exactly what's at play there.
Here again, I think the step two. Do you both know your step twos, Carly?
I mean, I took it a long time ago, but I don't have it memorized.
I think you and your mom looking at the step twos together would give you some of the information that you're looking for too, because that's where you're going to see a finer cut.
Sure.
Laurie, I'd go back to what you said at the start too, that EQ is developed, and usually we develop it when we need it for something, just like all our functions, we develop in service to the dominant. And so, what I see is a leader who's seen the reason, then is developing the skills no matter what their type is. And so Carly, maybe in what you do, you've just seen the need to act on what you see.
I mean, certainly I've gotten better over the years, right? I tried.
Even I, ENFP, that F is inside. I have not been the most caring, compassionate, demonstrative person, and my family wasn't. And it's only in my midlife and later years that I decided I had to be a kinder, nicer, caring person, that I needed to demonstrate some of that, because I'm in another world. And that those folks wanting more empathy and compassion sometimes didn't get a whole lot of that from me actively. So, okay, we're at 10:29. My last slide, I can't believe when I talked to myself about this, I took a lot more time. I took less time talking to you, but I think I said everything I wanted to. There is a final slide, and I'm willing to stay on if you want to continue the conversation. So this questioning ENFP, the questioning part is why people say to me, are you sure you're an F? Because I'll question something first and they see it as a criticism, but I'm only questioning and then I'll accommodate. I thank you for your interest in looking at this. Contact with me with any more questions or suggestions, or if you want to know more about the EQ HR Center, the slides are available to you. I already know the list of resources I put up, but I didn't put the center in there. There's my email address, and I would love to hear from you. And if anybody did think you wanted to have you 360 experience with the MBTI Step 2 together, we could do a dynamite offering through BAPT or privately. Angelina did a private thing once when I came. All you need is 8 to 10 people. Now that we're virtual, we can go anywhere.
Great, Laurie, thank you so much. That's been a great pulling together of these two models, which I know some of us are familiar with to a greater or lesser extent, but it's been great to have you here to pull those together for us and to spark some new thinking as well around this. So I'm now going to stop the recording.